And here we go again, another episode of the Suppress Herald podcast. And it is Sunday, the 12th of October, and quite a momentous week. And, really the propagandists at the Suppress Herald, paid for by oligarchs, liberal oligarchs, by the way, but paid for by oligarchs at the National Distrust for Local News, funded by Bill Gates and Claude Omidyar and the evil one we won't mention, who also supports Antifa and other organizations and supports your local news. Isn't that interesting? The George Soros Tides Foundation publishes your local news. In other words, they bought the local news so that you make sure you only get what news they think is fit to print. And we have just a couple of examples of what's going on. We've got the shutdown, the government shutdown, and we've got the Gaza Israeli peace plan and all the rest. And I'm not going to delve too much. You can do that for yourself and see the media, for starters, doesn't want to give Trump any credit. And for two, they actually don't want to talk about it that much at all. All of these, what are these, all these Hamas loving, terrorist loving terrorists in our country going to do now? If we have peace in Gaza and all, then they'll move on to the next thing, and that'll be really telling. We'll watch that, and I guarantee you that what you're going to see is they'll find something else to protest. We got the shutdown, we got healthcare. It will never end. And of course, there's immigration forever. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that today. And, the way that the media and the machine works, we have a headline in the paper that is Friday, October 10th. It's back to basics in reading and math. That's the headline on the Suppress Herald. And if you dive down into that, here's the subheadline. Following concerning declines among Maine students in test scores on national assessment, leaders in the state's Department of Education are amending the approach to instruction in these core skills. Following concerning declines? How about worst in the entire nation declines? As far as the highest decline in test scores in reading and math in the assessment tests, Maine finished first in the amount of decline. In other words, dead last in educating students. Dead last, both reading and math. They don't tell you that, but I've seen the study, I've seen the graphs. Not only was it wasn't even close for the most part. Maine crashed, and now our esteemed governor, which is pictured in this article on the front page because she's now going to run for Senate against a Republican, Susan Collins. So now we've got to try and touch her up, and oh, she's doing something about it. She ruined education in Maine in twofold ways. The COVID lockdowns, that did damage. That's where damage across the country happened. But here in Maine, we have something that, gee, it's not even talked about in this article. The announcement comes 9 months after Maine ranked near the bottom on a national assessment. Near the bottom? They were the bottom, absolute last in both reading and math. So right there, propaganda at work. They're not going to tell you the truth. Near the bottom. They were the bottom. Beth Lambert, the state's chief teaching and learning officer, said Governor Mills directed the department to take a concrete step to strengthen its approach to reading and math skills. And now they have new plans. What they're not talking about is over in this side over here, basically the biggest school district in Maine, Portland, South Portland, Biddeford, and up in Brunswick, or actually it's Lewiston School District, Portland School District, South Portland School District, Biddeford, and many others. But those are the most egregious. Huge influx of illegal immigrant children into those schools. They don't mention that that might be a factor, that might have something to do with it. Portland School District, the biggest school district in the state, biggest city in the state, most liberal, poorly run disaster in the state, opened their doors to illegal immigrants massively under Biden. And what you have now is 30%, 30% of all students in Portland school districts are English as a second language. So every classroom, you have a classroom with 30 kids, 10 of them don't speak English, 1/3 of that class. How is that going to allow for effective teaching in the schools? If you have four or five or three or two English as second language, you could have assistance and support that. But they've got, 30, 40, 50 different languages as primary languages. English is a second language, and you're trying to teach these students. What do you think the other 70% that are in that classroom are getting as far as instruction goes? And yet, not a word. This is called propaganda at its worst. The state is failed under liberal leadership, and Governor Mills wants to have a promotion. Yeah, she's ruined the state. Maybe she can move on and help ruin the country. But this is propaganda at its absolute worst. They refuse to talk about real issues, real cause here. And having 30% of your students not be able to speak English and being put right into those classrooms with all the other kids that do, you can't tell me that that's not a problem. But they are not going to talk about, they are not going to address it. And that is the reality. So there's where you start with right on the front page of Friday's paper. It's back to basics in reading and math. Maybe it should be back to basics in common sense that you can't flood that many people into these classrooms, into our communities, and not have consequences. And this goes well beyond the schools. This goes into costs of everything. And, the shutdown, get back to that. They keep denying that it's about giving health benefits to illegal immigrants, but it's not. They just basically change the definition of illegal immigrants and call them, all those that were released on parole under Biden and Mayorkas. And to my mind, Secretary Mayorkas should be tried and hanged for sedition and conspiracy to ruin our country for what he did, and he may well be. But back to this. This is what happens when you just overwhelm a system, and this is done intentionally, and you have a situation where school, the results are real. Test scores in Maine, dead last. So there you go. Then you have another Friday in Friday's paper, one other little note. Kennedy re-ups unproven Tylenol autism link during cabinet meeting. Re-ups unproven Tylenol autism link during cabinet meeting. This is where they try to make Kennedy out to be a wacko, and they cite various things, but what they don't tell you is that right on the bottle of Tylenol, which I did a short podcast on previously, bottom of the warning section on the bottle of Tylenol, pregnant or nursing women should consult a doctor before taking this. Does that say this is perfectly safe? That you should consult a doctor before you take it? All good here. Safe this can be, no worries, but consult a doctor. Tylenol, the makers of Tylenol have known for at least a decade and probably longer, and it's all coming out now. If you actually get your news from anybody but a propaganda machine like the Suppress Herald, they know that Tylenol has issues, potentially horrific issues, and could be contributing to autism. They know it. And they're spending billions to cover up all the damage done by all of these pharmaceuticals that Big Pharma has been putting on us and destroying things. We have cancer exploding. That was in today's Sunday Suppress Herald. Huge increase in cancer. What's going on? Chemicals, drugs. Look at the basic common sense of all of this. It's easy to see. We're poisoning our children, and it's causing cancer, it's causing autism. We have a major health problem, and Kennedy's trying to fix it. And the Suppress Herald and the propaganda machine that's bought and paid for by Big Pharma and others are trying to slow it down and from being stop these issues from being dealt with and fixed. It is egregious in my mind, just absolutely egregious that this should be happening. And we really need to look hard at what we're being fed and understand that this is just a massive propaganda machine. And it's absolutely crazy. So that's the latest from the Suppress Herald propaganda machine. And it goes on. And we also had today, and this is just absolutely rich. We have the local, you know, what's she call herself? The Maine millennial, and titled "What I Learned Over Coffee with Graham Plattner." So basically, you've got this guy who's an oyster farmer. He's a veteran, give him that. Great, he served. He's an oyster farmer, and that's pretty much it. And he's running for Senate against Susan Collins. I'm not a huge fan of Susan Collins, but you know what? At least she knows what she's doing. She does have a grasp of the issues. And this guy is just came from nowhere, a lot like a lot of the other people. You've got AOC in New York, who was a barista and, bartender, barista, whatever, and never did anything in her life. And now she's like leading their party. And you've got this guy, Mamdani, who's going to be the new, they say, new head of New York City, the state's, the country's dynamo center of the economy, Wall Street and all the rest. And my prediction is he'll be the last nail in the coffin of New York City. But he's never done anything. He's never accomplished anything in his life. And yet, here he comes singing the right tunes, and he's a communist, socialist, democratic socialist. What the hell is that? That's a communist. And so now we've got this Graham Plattner who's a Bernie bro, and he fits the mold for these liberal wacko ideas. And so you've got the Maine millennial who's going to sit down and tell us that we should vote for this guy. And she's going to try and paint him as this great guy. But let me tell you who the Maine millennial is. The Maine millennial talks all the time about her her wife. Okay, so she is married to another woman. It's fine. And they're having a baby. But then along the way, you find out that she kind of let the cat out of the bag, that her wife is actually a guy who is pretending to be a woman. How's that work? That's extremely confusing. And let me ask you something, just a very quick question. Is this someone who's married to a guy pretending to be a woman and having a baby? Is it her wife's baby? I mean, these questions are too bizarre to even get into. But let me ask you something. Is this somebody with a good grasp of reality that we should be taking advice from about who we should be voting for in our society? And I'll leave it at that. But this is who we are putting out there in the Suppress Herald. These are their heroes, the Maine millennial. It's basically an article, a regular column every Sunday about nothing. And that's pretty much what you get when you're dealing with liberals these days. A lot about nothing. There's no common sense. There's no reality. They're in a fictional world, and the Suppress Herald helps to write their stories. That's what you have, a fictional narrative perpetuated in the propaganda machine in this country, from national news right down to your local Suppress Herald newspaper and all of the liberals that run it, and they're all on another planet. They'll tell you that Portland, Maine is a great city right now. It's a dump. It's going to hell. Boarded up stores, needles on the sidewalks, dirty, nasty, dangerous, and that can't be told. They will not admit reality. And because of that, we won't fix the reality that is declining cities and states in this country. And here it is, the propaganda machine. They boost people that are not even connected to reality, and those are the people telling us what we should think. With that, I hope you can use a little bit more common sense and go find some real news, real information that sheds light on what's actually happening in the real world that we live in, and we can do something about it. I learned from a Navy SEAL years and years ago the problem solving matrix. It's a very, very simple thing. First, you define the problem, and then you find the solution. How can you define the problem if you're living in a fictitious world where reality is nowhere near your thoughts? That's what we have from the Democrat Party and liberals, and especially from the Democratic socialists who think that we're going to live in nirvana when we have socialism, communism, and everybody's happy. Couldn't be further from the truth. Show me one socialist, communist country where people are happy, the mainstream people are happy, and yeah, I'll send you a big check. Never happened. There is no such thing. With that, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope you come around to a world where reality is dominant and this socialist utopia that's never going to exist becomes part of history. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. And please, if you like the Suppress Herald podcast, share it, tell your friends, and we'll see you next time.